The battle this week between the White House and Democrats over the release of the full Mueller report has sparked a still raging debate over power in politics, oversight, and executive privilege. Many Republicans insist it's case closed, but there are some cracks on the GOP side. And Democratic leaders, frustrated by President Trump's refusal to comply with their demands, declared that the U.S. is in a constitutional crisis. Joining me tonight, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Laura Barone-Lopez, national political reporter for Politico. Abby Phillip, White House correspondent for CNN. And Eamon Javers, Washington correspondent for CNBC. Peter wrote about the president's strategy in Friday's Times. His bottom line, Mr. Trump is daring Democrats to impeach him. The message from the West Wing, put up or shut up. Impeach or move on. Peter, you've written a book, The Breach, about the Clinton impeachment. You've co-authored a book about the impeachment process. When Democrats talk about a constitutional crisis, one, are we actually at that moment? And is this battle any different than things we've seen in the past on impeachment and the efforts to move toward there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know whether we're at a constitutional crisis. We're certainly at a constitutional confrontation. I think that's a fair way of putting it. We might get to a crisis if a court were to weigh in, for instance, and somebody were then not to obey the lawful order of a court. That would certainly be a crisis. But we are seeing we're seeing what we've seen in the past on steroids, right? We have had in the past presidents who defied or resisted the Congress when they tried to subpoena things, when they tried to solicit testimony that a president didn't want to have. Other presidents have asserted executive privilege. But this one is saying we're doing it across the board. And he's basically saying, I'm done with this. I'm not participating anymore. I'm not playing your games. And if you want to come after me, come after me.
Laura, why is Speaker Pelosi holding back on impeachment? Is it to protect vulnerable Democrats? What is it?
I think that's a big piece of it, because we know that if Democrats go down this route, and she's mentioned this before, right, that when Republicans did this under Clinton, they suffered the consequences politically the next election cycle. And she doesn't want that to happen. They just got a hold of the House. They have 40 seats that they have to defend, ones that they flipped from red to blue. And there are plenty of vulnerable Democrats. And I was actually speaking to some of them today. And right now, they aren't too nervous about what the escalation and the investigations. They still feel pretty good that Pelosi is firm on no impeachment. But if this keeps going on for 6 more months, I was talking to some of them today, and they said that's when maybe they will start speaking out, and the tension could bubble up amongst the Democrats.
Abby, what's the mood inside of the administration? The Attorney General, he's about to be held in contempt of Congress. The House Judiciary Committee moved in that direction, yet he was making jokes about it this week at a farewell ceremony for Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General.
Well, this is all just part of the president's natural instinct to just simply push back on all of these things. President Trump views all of the various investigations, which are actually on a number of different disparate topics, as all part of the same effort by Democrats to buttonhole him and trap him into some kind of legal jeopardy, or at the very least, some political damage in the future. So I think he and the White House are pursuing a strategy of giving not even an inch on any of these things, regardless of whether the strategy is ultimately going to succeed. There's a sense in the White House that they haven't really thought through the entirety of all these legal battles, but the mere fact of delay is part of the strategy in and of itself, frustrating the Democrats, making it more difficult for them to create a seamless narrative to the public. That is what they're trying to do, even if down the line some of these things they might not actually succeed on, because there is not actually a firm a bedrock to stand on when it comes to the legality of some of these moves.
The House Ways and Means Committee, Eamon, they issued a subpoena on Friday for the president's tax returns, another escalation of their efforts to get documents about the president's finances. Where does this lead? Do they actually end up in the hands of Richie Neal, the chairman?
You feel like ultimately the Democrats are going to get the president's tax returns here at some point. The question is when, and how many layers of court battles do they have to go through? Does this ultimately end up in the Supreme Court is the big question right now. Ultimately, though, you would think that the Democrats will be able to get these tax returns. And then the question is, what's in them, and is there anything in there that's politically damaging? The president's made a calculation that whatever heat he's taking politically for not putting them out is worth taking, because whatever's in there will be worse for him politically. So we'll find out at some point. I would imagine in this term we'll find out the answer to that question. And the president has had a remarkable ability to roll through all sorts of things that might have been devastating politically to any other politician. He might be able to roll through this one too, even if the tax returns do come out.
So they're holding people in contempt. We may see Secretary Mnuchin held in contempt about the tax returns. Don McGahn, the former White House counsel, the White House has asserted executive privilege about his testimony. He could be held in contempt. But you're the resident expert here on impeachment. Could impeachment proceedings, if they formally moved in that direction, actually help House Democrats compel testimony and get documents?
Yeah, so the argument is that on the part of some of Trump's allies is that the Congress doesn't have a legitimate legislative purpose for some of the things it's trying to do. What law are they trying to pass here? What is the reason for their asking for this information? If they were to actually formally open an impeachment inquiry, there's very little argument against it because that's so squarely in the four corners of their power under the Constitution. And it would get, and courts have made clear in the past that a Congress pursuing impeachment has, a greater call for overcoming things like executive privilege. Now, it's one of these things where the president may get something he may not really want. It's the dog chasing the car. He may push them so far in resisting on these subpoenas that they decide to go for an impeachment inquiry to strengthen their hand, and then suddenly he's in a different place. Now, he may think that's a political winner because it doesn't look like there's any kind of votes in the Senate to convict him. But once you open that kind of thing, you don't know where it leads.
But isn't this a president who just likes a fight, right? I mean, to some extent, this is a president who thrives when there's a political foil, right? So if it's the opponent during the general election, if it's the Democrats now, when he can be out there fighting and punching somebody in the nose rhetorically, he thrives, he wins, he rallies his base. To some extent, whether you delay, just the idea of fight helps him, doesn't it?
And I think there's also the risk for Democrats in just the fatigue of all of this. The Mueller investigation took 2 years. An impeachment proceeding, getting to the point of impeachment will take some time, but an impeachment proceeding will take a long time. There is the risk here, and I think the Republicans and the president are banking on it, that the public will get so tired of all of this, they will start to tune it out, and it'll become less important to them. Steve Bannon used to talk a lot about just sort of throwing things out there so that people can't focus on any one thing. And I think that in President Trump has become kind of a mode of operating, not so much perhaps a strategy, but just simply a way of being and operating, that he is always doing so much that people have to focus on that no one can really pay attention to one thing at a time.
What we hear from Special Counsel Mueller?
Well, right now, we aren't sure. It looks like the May 15th marker is going to come and go, and he's most likely not going to testify on that day. Negotiations, Democrats are saying that they're still ongoing. They're still trying to find a way for him to come and testify, but there's no set date. It could take much longer than we think. But I want to go back to what Abby said about throwing all these things out here and the fatigue that Democrats may face, because on the campaign trail right now, whether you're out with the 2020 Democrats running or you're in the vulnerable House seats, they're not talking about Mueller, they're not talking about impeachment, they're asking about health care, they're asking about prescription drug costs, and so they really aren't focused on this. And if it continues, maybe they will start to
Well,
be worried about it.
that's one difference with Bill Clinton, right? In some ways, they approach impeachment similarly, but one difference is that Clinton didn't talk about this stuff. He didn't want to bring it up every day.
He didn't fight.
Trump
He
does.
did school uniform.
He says, I'm focused on issues
stuff
that matter to you. I'm focused on the things that you're talking about on the campaign trail, and let those people deal with the muckety stuff. And he rose in the polls, didn't go down in the polls during impeachment. He went up in the polls during impeachment. It was a successful strategy for him. Trump is taking the other way. As you say, he likes to fight. He wants to have the argument. And he's got a pretty powerful argument, right? He says, Mueller didn't charge me, therefore you guys are just partisans. And it's more complicated than that, right? Everybody who's read the report knows it's more complicated than that. But his argument is simple and straightforward and easily saleable.
And it's more than an argument, it's a fight. You have the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, going over to Ukraine to try to urge the Ukrainians to investigate Vice President Biden and other rivals for President Trump. I mean, this is a White House fighting not just on Capitol Hill over documents, but across the board.
Yeah, really, and very much trying to use what they believe were the strategies that were used against them in 2016 against their
What do you
future
mean by
20. In the White House's view, in President Trump's view, that they were under investigation and that they were hurt by these efforts to kind of criminalize them after the campaign, and I think that they want to basically take that and throw it against Joe Biden, and also do what they did with Hillary Clinton by trying to frame Hillary Clinton as someone who was corrupt, framing Joe Biden in that same way. So this is going to be a really ugly fight, especially since at this early stage, this is how we're starting out.
But the Democrats aren't the only people debating their path forward. President Trump sharply criticized Richard Burr, the Republican Senate Intelligence Committee chairman, after it was reported that Burr issued a subpoena to his eldest son, Donald Trump Jr.
My son testified for hours and hours. My son was totally exonerated by Mueller, who, frankly, does not like Donald Trump, me.
The Republican-led committee wants the younger Mr. Trump to answer questions about his earlier testimony about that Trump Tower Moscow project. Why is Chairman Burr holding firm while so many Republicans are saying move on, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said case closed?
Right. So Burr is, I think, one, not up for re-election. He has been known for being independent and trying to maintain this bipartisanship on the Senate Intel Committee, which is a contrast with House Intelligence, which totally, fell apart in partisanship. And so he, as you mentioned, they seem to believe or are thinking that Don Jr. may have lied to them when he testified before, and so that's why they subpoenaed him and took this step.
Take me through Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's thinking here. He goes to the floor and says case closed, but then on Tuesday at the Senate lunch, privately, he doesn't go after Senator Burr. Yeah. He's saying let the process play out. What's going on here?
To me, this was a reminder of the old days on Capitol Hill where you had the independent committee chairman, the old bulls they used to call them, who were able to do pretty much what they wanted. And leadership had to kind of go along with that. And this seems to be a case where you've got maybe one last old bull out there still doing what he wants, despite what leadership is saying. The overt messaging from leadership is, this is over, it's done, shut it down, we're moving on. And here you've got one chairman out there saying, you know what, I still have a few questions about this and I'd like them answered.
And he's not running for re-election, and that gives him a lot of political power.
But, Abby, Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina, just like Senator Burr, he's up in 2020, and he's not echoing Burr. He's rallying behind President Trump and Donald Trump Jr.
No, he's not, because this is Donald Trump's party. And if you're running for re-election in Donald Trump's party, you have to be very clear about where you stand on this issue of Donald Trump Jr.'s subpoena. It is not one of those things where the president and his allies will look the other way if people are suddenly saying, oh, it's okay for this to happen.
Yeah,
I mean, perhaps the only exception to that might be Mitch McConnell, but it's Friday. I don't want to say what's going to happen next week. I mean, the president has no.
I don't want to say what happens next hour.
Exactly. The president has been known to really lash out at people if he doesn't believe that they're loyal enough. And McConnell,
Senator Tillis has a primary foe.
Right. So, this is where it hurts the most for Republicans, when they are at risk of being primaried. This is about the Republican Party politics, where the president has 90% approval. You cannot go against the president in that party, and you will face a real challenge in the primary. And the president's allies have been more than willing to back some of these primary challengers in other races. So you can't put that, they're not going to really stick with the incumbent every single time.